Good afternoon, everybody. We'll be starting the webinar at the bottom of the hour. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome, everyone. I had a question come in the Q&A as to whether we have audio. Um, can you either tell me in the chat or through the Q&A that you can hear me right now? Great. Thank you, Andy. We have audio and we'll be starting in about a minute. Thank you. All right. It is 1:30 Central Time, and we're going to kick off the webinar. A few housekeeping notes. Please enter any questions that you have for Sandy during the course of the presentation in the Q&A box. We are happy to answer any questions you might have. If you are here for CPE credit, please note that you must answer all poll questions. We must submit those to show that you are eligible for CPE. So following the webinar, I will be sending out an email, and it will include a recording of the session, the slides from the session, and a link to a survey. Tell us how we're doing. We would love to hear from you. Our speaker today is Sandy Wickman, a senior business consultant for LBMC Technology Solutions. She was one of the first implementation experts to earn the Dynamics Credentialed Professional Certification. Sandy is a sought-after speaker who just recently led sessions on both GP and Business Central at Dynamics Community Summit and served on multiple Ask the Experts panel. She is bringing her deep expertise to guide us through GP year-end close today. So without further delay, Sandy, the session is yours.
Thanks, Dawn. It's great to be here with everyone today. I want to mention that our session today is going to be following along with our friend Amber Bell's excuse me, Training Dynamo workbook. So for those of you who chose to invest in the workbook as a part of this, I'll be calling out the page numbers as we go along so that you can make your own notes in that, as well as have this slide deck at the end to be able to refer to. So congratulations, our companies have made it through another year. It seems like that's an important feat these COVID impacted years, doesn't it? One of the things that I want to highlight to you is that if you can improve your month-end close, your year-end close will be easy. So thinking about this in terms of closing each and every one of your periods will make the year-end close an easier task. And the biggest issue we'll discuss is the importance of balancing the general ledger to your subledgers. There is a workflow to which you should apply your closing efforts. So we're going to start with our distribution series. So PO, SO, and inventory. Then we'll move on to the core modules, payables, receivables, and if you use it, the tax year end. Then we'll move to our cash and fixed assets, and finally to general ledger. If you happen to be on using GP payroll, there was a separate webinar for that. We will not cover that during this session today. So what's the secret to a pain-free year-end closing? As I mentioned, it's all about your period end close. Okay, so focusing on getting those things with a routine and having the ability to be able to repeat that on a monthly basis makes the year end super easy. On page 8 in your workbook, we're talking about a pre-close checklist. And there are a number of things that you can do before you even get started with your year-end close. And I would highly suggest that you do so even now, right? So one of them involves your IT department and getting them to check your disk space on the server. There is a necessity for some additional space when the process of closing takes place. And there's a calculation on page 9 that shows you how to figure out the space available and the minimum size that you would need in order to make sure that you don't have server issues when you do the closing. So this can take place several weeks or even months in advance of your close, but we need to make sure that you have enough space. And while you're at it, have them check the memory as well. Make sure you're in a good position in terms of your infrastructure before you start. Then we're going to set up a new fiscal year. We'll review master posting and batch recovery, post all the batches, get everyone out of GP, and then throughout the webinar, we're going to be talking about taking special SQL backups. So this first one is a SQL backup of the Dynamics database and all the company databases. So that checking the server disk space, there is a table within GP, the GL 20,000 table, that is used to be able to calculate the amount of space that would be necessary for your close to happen. There are a number of different reports that get printed throughout this process. Some of them are huge. There really isn't a reason to print them to paper. What we suggest is create a file location, a share file location, where you can PDF or text file all of these reports off to. You can keep them all together in your year-end closing, right? Name it something with the year, and then each of the modules if you choose to, Then you have them available to you without having to use up printer and paper and space. We're going to then create a new fiscal year. In just a moment, we'll go over into GP and actually see how that's done. That's the navigation to it at the bottom of the screen. We're going to check our user activity and look at batch recovery. So let's jump over to GP and take a look at those first three things. So first, we're going to set up our fiscal year. So I'm navigating to the administration area page. And in the setup pane, I'm going to go into the fiscal period window. Now my GP is in the Fabricam or 2 company. So my latest year that I had created already was 2029. So I'm way into the future compared to what most of you would see. Typically, if you click the down arrow, your last year would be 2023. And we're going to create the year for the next year. So in my environment, I'm going to type the next year, which would be 2030. I'll validate that the first day is January 1st. The last day is 12/31, and I have 12 periods. And then click the calculate button. And you'll see that it creates for me the 12 periods for my next year. Now you can certainly type in these fields if you like to see things like the month instead of period 1 through 12. You can type those new values within those period names. And then I suggest that you use this close all button to close those periods. So we don't want anyone to post into them yet. We just wanted to get it created for future use. And then click the OK on the ribbon. So that's setting up a new fiscal year. Then we're going to check our user activity. We want to be able to tell when we have users still in our system so we know we can take action. So I'm still on that administration area page. And this time in my utilities, under system, I'm going to look for user activity. Now I'm the only user who's logged into my GP, but you would see here every user who's currently logged in. Now your first thing would be to ask them to finish their transactions and log out properly. If by chance they went home and they forgot, you can certainly use this delete function, but it can interrupt other transactions. So I warn you against it if the users really can log out themselves. As of GP 2013 R2, you also have the ability to be able to send users a message. So within that administration area page, under utilities, I could send my users a message and give them a day and time that things are going to be closing and they need to be logged out, or tell them they need to log out right now, right? And you can send that message. Any user who's actually looking at their GP would get a message within GP with your note to them. And then lastly, we wanted to look at batch recovery. So I have my batch recovery set up in a couple of different ways. Just for navigation purpose, I want to show you that you can get to it in a few different ways, going to my GP button, to Tools, Routines, and Batch Recovery. The batch recovery function is a place where transaction errors get addressed. If there's anything in batch recovery, it means that there was some sort of a transaction error and you need to address the error. By using this, marking those batches and clicking continue, it does not address the errors. It simply puts them back into the series of batch posting that they originated in. Then you would need to go into your master posting, which you can find in the same place, Tools, Routines, and Master Posting. And you would need to go through the specific series to see what needs to happen. And very often you would see in the status here some indication that it was recovered from batch recovery and maybe even what needs to happen to it. You can also use the batch edit lists to be able to find out what happens next. Okay, let's go back to our PowerPoint then. We went all the way through that master posting. That master posting is your one-stop shop for all those unposted batches. You can add that to your toolbar at the top of your window so that you can get to it on a regular basis if you choose to do that. All right, let's see. Then we're going to do that backup. This truly is a critical step. So in many cases, you have IT folks who do a nightly backup, and those backups expire after a period of time. So maybe they keep them for 5 days until they believe that there's not a reason to go back to them. Well, our suggestion in this case is to make the backups before you do each module close, each module. Right? So we're going to do several of them. I'll call this back to your attention throughout. Do not rely on your nightly backup. You don't want to have to lose a whole day's worth of business transactions and go back to having to do those things over again. Okay, Dawn, I think we're ready for poll question number 1.
Outstanding. So here's poll question number 1. As it relates specifically to year-end closing, when should special SQL backups be created? You've got prior to closing each module, prior to closing only the general ledger module, prior to closing only a fixed asset is included, and none. Simply rely on your nightly backup. Give you just a few more moments before I close this out. And remember that if you are here for CPE, I need you to answer. Very good. I'm going to be ending the poll.
Okay, in terms of our workflow then, we're going to be starting with purchase order processing. So we're on page 19 in your workbook, and that page 19 gives you one of several period end checklists. So, you know, if you still want to be paper driven, you could take that and make lots of copies of it, and you could use that as your period end checklist for all of your team as you go through the process every month. Alternatively, you could make something electronic that mimics this and have people sign off that they're actually using those steps to get through the process. Remember that period end process is the best way to improve your year end. So we're going to take several steps. We're going to enter and review and post all of the batches. We'll delete empty, unused batches. We're going to print our received not invoiced report and balance that to the general ledger. And then optionally, we're going to remove completed purchase orders. So we looked at where we would go and see the batches to do the batch posting and batch recovery. So we won't go back to that again. Our next step is to do the received not invoiced report and verify these PO history settings. So this slide is an important part of that optional step of removing POs. So POs don't automatically move to history on their own. You have to go through the process to move them to history. And if these settings are marked, then what that means is they'll move from the open tables to the history tables. If these settings are not marked, what you're doing is actually removing the POs from your database entirely. So a pretty important step, and it's documented on page 23. And we'll look at removing those completed POs in practice. So let's go back to our GP. And the first thing I want to show you in the demonstration part is the ability to run a received not invoiced report to balance to your GL. So within my purchasing area page, in reports, I'm going to analysis. And the last report, nope, the third to the last is the received not invoiced report. I can create a report option, including any of the choices that I want to. In this case, it really is wise to just leave it with blank. Make sure your destination is set to a screen and potentially file, right? If we use that file, we're going to print to a text file into that folders that we created earlier and print the report. Alternatively, there is an ability to be able to use a SQL Services Reporting Services, SSRS report, and it has the ability to do a historical point in time. So the one that I just showed you as a GP report doesn't have any date filter. So if you wanted something that would match a prior period, you would have to run this historical received not invoiced report from this one in order to get that date filter in it. So you can use this to include, I would have to do all the login. Anyway, you can include a date range with this historical received not invoiced one. So try that out. If you need any help with it, let us know. We'd be happy to help you. I'm going back to my purchasing area page, and I'm going to show you where we verify that purchase order processing history settings. So in my setup area of my purchasing area page, I'm going to purchase order processing. And here in the center of the screen, I have this maintain history. And even if you don't do requisitions within your GP, it's fine to have all 4 of these marked. That way you know that you're covering all of the bases when you're maintaining history for transactions. Then if sometime in the future you decide you're going to include requisitions, you know that you're covered because you've already got it set for that history. Okay, once we reviewed that received not invoiced report, we're balancing that to our accrued purchases account in the GL. If they don't agree, we certainly need to take care of that in our period end processing. And then that optional step that I mentioned here in routines is remove completed purchase orders. So any purchase order that was properly concluded means it was closed, it was canceled, right? Those are the 2 properly completed types of transactions inserted into the list. You can use the restrictions list to be able to see those, and then you click process. And it moves them from the open tables in the SQL database to the historical tables. Absolutely do recommend that you do a SQL backup before doing that remove completed purchase orders. As you might imagine, if there was anything that went wrong during that, you could have some fallout from it. So do a special backup before you do those. Okay. So the period end checklist is the final period end of the year. There is no special routine or button or utility for purchase order processing year end. You've just completed your period 12 period end processing, and then you move on. Dawn, I'll just check in. Are there any questions?
No, nothing in the Q&A. Nothing in the chat.
Sales order processing then. So our next module we're going to do is the period end checklist for sales orders. So very similar. We're going to enter, review, and post. We're going to delete those empty or unused batches, post all the GL batches that were created by SOP that didn't get posted all the way through. We'll verify our sales order processing history settings. And then optionally, we're going to reconcile or remove those sales documents. Okay. Additionally, we can close the fiscal period for that module as well. So very much like what we saw in purchasing, we're going to verify those history settings. Really important step. We're going to reconcile and remove those sales documents. I mentioned lots of backups. There it is again. Back up that Dynamics and Company database. And then process. Okay, let's go take a look in GP then. So I'm now on my sales area page. And I'm on page 26 in the workbook, 26, 27. So the first thing I want to do is go into my setup. So I'm scrolling down the window here to my setup area, and in sales order processing setup, I'm looking here at this maintain history area to assure that I've got all those check boxes marked so that when I do move things to history, it's not actually removing them from the database. Then the next option I have is in the utilities, where I'm going to reconcile and remove those sales documents. So this window gives you some choices. You can select from a group of documents if you choose to do that, and you can use different sorts of selection criterias, right? So you could sort this by date and remove them by date. You could do document types and document numbers. So you could make this selection based on a variety of things. And then you have two choices. You either reconcile or remove. Notice the radio button only works on one or the other. But what I like about this window is you can tell it that I'm ultimately going to reconcile, but I want to print just the report first. If you tell it to print report only with either of these radio buttons in process, it simply prints the report to let you know what will happen when you do it. Then you'd come back and go through the same set of steps again, but not mark the print report only. So this gives you a little pre-test to be able to see what's going to happen when you do that, reconcile and or remove documents. Okay. So just with purchase order processing, the sales order processing year-end close does not have any additional steps. Once you've done that 12th period, you've completed the process for sales order processing. Optionally, you could do sales tax year-end close here at this point as well. The tax year-end close exists only once. You'd only have to do it once if you use tax for purchase order and sales order. You'd only have to do it once. So timing is very important for payables and receivables management, right? If you enter transactions for the next year before you complete the closing process, you have some choices. You can enter them into a batch and save it and not post it. Or you can go ahead and proceed with those transactions in the next year. What you need to know, though, there are fields in Windows and SmartList that are accumulating year-to-date information, and some of that information would then be incorrect because it only stops counting for the year when you do the year-end process. So, as an example, the year-to-date and last year information on SmartList and inquiry windows, several of those options I have shown you screenshots of here, may not be accurate if you transact into the next year before doing year-end. However, most companies can't have a firm cutoff on January 1st because they haven't received all of the information from their vendors or payments from their customers. So just know that it's fine for you to go ahead and move forward. You just wouldn't rely on these year-to-date or last year information in the SmartList. Okay, Receivables Management, our next module. We're on page 30 in your workbook. We're going to post all our AR transactions, apply all of our unapplied documents. We'll age our customer balances. We're going to print our historical age trial balance dated for the last day of the period, and then balance that historical age trial balance to our GL, right? When we talked about having all of our subledgers reconciled, these are important steps, and then close that fiscal period. So I did make mention here in this slide that there are things within GP called checklists, and they could be useful to you. You can list all the different kinds of steps for a variety of different frequencies. You'll notice here that this frequency says month end. The only thing that you need to be aware of if you choose to use these is if anyone opens that routine from this checklist window, it marks it as the date and time and the user ID at the time when they open it. They may not have completed the actual task. If they just open the window, it marks it as done. So it's very possible and quite likely that you would not use these checklists. So they're not really telling of the actual activities taking place. Okay, so we have an unapplied document report we're going to look at. There's also a smart list that's provided for you out of the box from Microsoft and could be useful to you. You just need to make sure that it balances to the out of the box GP report, because sometimes smart lists get adjusted by others and you're not aware of it. So you want to just make sure that the numbers all align with the GP report, so you know there isn't other favorites or someone saved over your smart list. And then we're going to age our AR balance. So I wonder if everyone on the call is aware that GP does not automatically age in Dynamics GP. It does seem like that in a number of ways. You can look at it and it looks like it's got things in the right buckets, but that's not actually the case. It's not doing aging automatically. And we recommend that you do this process, particularly if you have collections in play, because the aging is going to be a necessary part of making sure you're collecting on the totals in buckets appropriately. Some of our clients do once a month on the aging. A number of clients age every day, which is fine as well.
Sandy,
Yes.
Can we answer a question?
Sure.
Okay, the question is this: would performing a reconcile utility realign the year-to-date amounts if payables and receivables were posted after the year-end close process was completed?
No, it will not.
Thank you.
No. We're going to write off our over and under payments, and I'll talk to you a little bit more about that, and then we'll go on to the next part. So we're going to start on page 33. So we're going to review our unapplied documents, and there are two ways to see those. So in sales, in the reports area of our page, under analysis, there is an option here for unapplied documents. So you can run this one, and if you choose to use this, you can do so. And the alternative is you would balance this list that gets printed from GP against a smart list, which is out of the box provided by Microsoft, under sales, under receivable transactions, and unapplied documents. So if you balance this smart list to that out of the box printed one, then you could use this as well, which is sometimes an easier list to work from. Okay, we reviewed our unapplied. We do all of the application of payments. Now the apply function shows up on page 35. So if you're unfamiliar with or need a refresher on unapplying and applying documents, there's some options in there for you. There is an ability to move something back from history if you accidentally closed or fully applied a document and it moved to history automatically. And I wanted to call that out on page 35 as well. So if you had to use the professional services tools library, you can move something back from history so that you can apply it differently if you need to. Then within our routines is that aging function. So this functionality, we recommend doing at least once a month, once every period, but you can do it as often as you choose to, weekly, daily, etc. The aging date typically would be today's date. You can leave this marked for all the statement cycles. The account types, typically you leave it marked for all. You can age an individual customer if you choose to, but it's not necessary. And then this next part is kind of useful. So this particular report that prints when you do this aging process is somewhat similar to the historical age trial balance, but it has a few variations. So most of the time people have relied on that historical age trial balance. So there really is no reason to run this report. You can just run the process and then go on and run your historical trial balance in the other window, in the aging window. Okay. So remember, accounts receivable balances do not automatically age in GP. Okay. Okay, there is a functionality within GP sales module to write off over and under payments. Now, there is some setup that you have to do in order for this to work. So I'm going to go to sales and routines, and this is the write off documents functionality. So you can write off underpayments or overpayments. So what that means is if your customers underpaid you by $1 or less, you could just create write-offs without having to open individual customers and do transactions to write off that $1 or less transaction. It'll do them in mass. So it's a nice way to be able to get small balances out of your GP environment if you just don't feel the need to go and collect on those. Now, there is some functionality set up, and you have some settings within your customer records if you want to use this, and we'd be happy to help you. And then you put in your write-off limit and the cutoff date. You do have a preview window, so you can look and see who's going to be impacted by that, and then you can click the process. It creates all of those documents at one time for all of the customers or documents that meet the criteria you put in there. There is information on page 38 in your workbook that shows you where the setups are on the customer records for those write-offs. Okay, so let me make sure I'm on track with my slides. Yes. So verifying the history settings, like we've done for payables and sale, purchase order and sales order, is necessary for the receivables and sales as well. However, it's not quite as easy to look for them. These are set on individual customers, right? Each individual customer has maintained history settings. So rather than having to go through and look at every single customer, there's a few ways that we've given you in the appendix, and the appendix exists either in the slide deck or in your workbook, where you can look at all of these in a smart list. So that appendix is called Appendix 3, and it's a smart list to verify these history settings. Essentially, what you're doing is adding these four fields into a smart list so that you can go through them and make sure they all say yes, which is that they're maintaining history. So very important review. Definitely want to include that in your review before you go on to the next steps. This slide is an example of what was created out of that appendix number 3. So you can see those 4 columns about keeping history, and wherever it says no, you could then go and make those updates within the customer that needed it. Once we've done all that review, and only then, you can move paid transactions to history. Let's go do that. We're on page 40. So in the routines section is paid transaction removal. So before I select that, I want to point out to you, anyone who has elected to give others in your environment the power user functionality, I want to point out to you how easy it could be to make a mistake because you have too much access in your GP. So this routines paid transaction removal looks really similar to these removal functions. These removal functions on the utility side are removing data out of your GP. So it could be catastrophic if you had people who accidentally removed distributions instead of paid transaction removal. And I've had customers do it. So if you'd like any help with reviewing security and making sure that users have only what they need, we'd be happy to help you with that. So paid transaction removal. You have the ability to do that by a couple of different ways: customers, names, types. You could also do it by customer classes. And then here at the bottom, you have some check marks for what it is we're actually going to remove and what the cutoff dates are. So for two fields, the NSF and the checks, Microsoft has given us in this version the ability to have a cutoff date for those NSFs. So what that means is if you're still accepting checks and there's a potential for one of them to come back as non-sufficient funds, then you could put a cutoff date that's a month earlier than your process today. Then if anything got returned in that month as non-sufficient funds, it would still be in the open tables for you to be able to do something with it. And the same is true for checks. So typically voids, waived, and paid transactions, we don't see those same kind of things. So there's not a reason for those date fields against those specific ones. Okay, so backdate these cutoff fields 1 month. Make sure your print register is marked and process. There is an option for balance forward consolidation if for those of you who use balance forward. Okay, then we're going to print AR aging reports. So within our trial balances, right, historical age trial balance, you're going to print these out and make sure you print them to the folders that we made at the start of our webinar, right? We're going to print those out to a text file and keep them, or PDFs. I want to also point out that on the financial area page in the utilities section is a reconcile function. Sorry, that's not the one I wanted. It is this one, routines section, reconcile to GL. This offers an opportunity for you to use an Excel spreadsheet to be able to reconcile your payables, receivables, inventory, or bank rec. I find the payables and receivables one to be very useful. I would not suggest that you use the inventory and bank rec for that. Those modules have other functionality that you should use the subledgers directly in them as opposed to this reconcile to GL. But this can be useful if you find that your subledger of payables or receivables doesn't balance to the general ledger. Okay, so our year-end close checklist, we reviewed everything. We completed our period end checklist for the last period. We printed our historical age trial balance. We're going to do another SQL backup, dynamics in your company databases. Close those fiscal periods and save the year-end close report to the GP year-end 2023 folder. Yep, we talked about that. And then optionally, I mentioned there's one time necessary to do the sales tax period close in the administration receivable area.
Sandy, we have another question.
Okay.
What would be a good cutoff date for year-end in paid transactions removal?
So those two fields are the only ones where you can do a date. And regardless of whether it's year-end or not, this should be a part of your period end activities. And I suggest that you date this backwards by 1 month for these two fields. Okay. Okay, so receivables management year-end close, there is an actual year-end close function. So we completed our period end. Now we're going to do the year-end. Okay. So within the routines area of our sales area page is the year-end close function. Be sure that the backups are done and your users are out, and then you can potentially either close both your fiscal and calendar together, or you could choose to close fiscal and calendar separately. Make sure that the box is marked to print the report, and when the print dialog box comes up, tell it to print to that place where you are saving your reports, and then click the process button. So after you've done this once in your environment, it'll show those last closing dates here. And it actually shows the date you did it, not the date that it closed through, right? The date that you took action, not the date that it closed the year through. Okay. There is a year-end report that comes up with that. So again, print those to the text file or PDF, put them in that location that we created. So what actually happens when you run this process? So the year-end close process summarizes activity since your last close, and it clears activity since your last close in the year-to-date fields, which is why those year-to-date fields would not be accurate if you didn't do it on the first of the next year. Okay, Dawn, I think we're ready for poll question number 2, and I think we'll just give you a moment of silence to read the poll this time. So that will keep us on track for our timing. Hey, Dawn, I think that's good. Yes, enough time.
I think we've got a few more people.
Okay. We'll give them another moment.
Just yeah, we're getting a last minute surge here.
Okay.
All right, I'm going to end the poll.
Thanks so much. Okay, I mentioned that tax year end close you only have to do once, whether you're using both sales order and receivables management, and potentially payables management too, if you're using use tax. So on page 45 in your workbook, right, you only have to do it once. Mark a couple of boxes, click the process button. Notice on this window that the process button is on the bottom of the window, not on the ribbon. So a little inconsistency there, but it's on the bottom of the window. All right, we're going to roll right into payables management. So we're on page 46. So that's another one of those handy dandy little checklists. You're welcome to copy it or create your own electronic version of to be able to make sure that the tasks get completed and people sign off on the tasks that they're completing for your period end. We're going to review and post our batches, check that batch recovery window, print our historical age trial balance, reconcile payables to GL, and close that fiscal period. I mentioned checklists before, so we won't spend much time there. So printing our AP aging reports, that historical age trial balance on my purchasing area page, going into reports and trial balance. I'm going to choose the historical age trial balance. You can put some parameters in if you'd like. I recommend that you make sure you mark the in detail button so that it includes all of the details. And then your destination. Would be potentially to the screen and to a file, at least the file. Sometimes I like to print them to the screen and the file so that I can view what it is that got printed to the text file and make sure that it's all there. And then save or generate your report. Print that aging, make sure that it balances to your general ledger. So whether you have one GL that's AP or multiples, that you reconcile that historical age trial balance to your general ledger accounts. All right, so with payables, we have a variety of other year-end prep things. So you need to order those 1099 forms and envelopes. However, for those of you who are now on the latest version of GP, which came out in October of this year, so unless you've had an upgrade since October, you're on an older version. But those of you who are on that 18.6 version from this year, the 1099 forms now all print with lines. So you can print your 1099s on blank paper. So, getting some envelopes, verify your 1099 vendor setups. So again, there's appendix in the back of the workbook and also at the end of the slide deck that show you how to create a smart list to verify your 1099 setups. Correct any duplicate vendors. You can call us to discuss the options. Review your 1099 data, right? Print that 1099 edit list. Make sure you've got everything covered. Make vendor data corrections. And then please be sure and alert your AP team. Tell them when you plan to close the year and that you need some time when they're not keying in other AP transactions so that you pull the accurate data for the period end that you need for it to end, and that they're putting things into future periods or something as needed. So you get that cutoff for your 1099 data. So very similar to what we showed in the customer records, our settings for maintaining history for vendors is also on a vendor by vendor basis. So a pretty important step, create that smart list. Go make sure you can see that you've maintained history settings on every one of your vendors. And then we get to our payables management year end. I also, let's see, let me make sure. Yeah, we'll do that in a moment. I want to walk through some of the 1099 information, and then we'll go back to the year end. So on page 53 in your workbook is the window for printing your 1099s. So there's a couple of changes since this slide deck. So I left both versions, an older version and the ribbon version, here on the slide so that you could see what they look like. If you push this print button that I'm pointing to here, this print button is the one that prints the edit list. This print button prints the forms. Okay, so it's one of the benefits that has been added to later versions rather than this older window where that wasn't entirely visible how it would happen. Another thing that has changed in recent versions is this form type now shows continuous instead of single feed. Sorry, I said that backwards. Now shows single feed instead of continuous because nobody buys tractor feed paper anymore. So it now says form type single feed is the default, and that is what you would want. So I want to talk about some IRS changes to 1099 requirements. Our LBMC team did a previous webinar that was related to tax filing. So if you missed that, I think we'd be happy to provide you information to get to that. It was recorded and could be available to you. But some of the highlights from that are that the IRS has changed the e-filing requirement so that if the sum of all of your document types is 10 or more, you have to file electronically. So that really pretty much means everybody, right? Most companies have more than 10 vendors that are 1099 and or W-2s, other kinds of forms, right? So most everyone is going to have to do electronic filing. So bear that in mind. We have a couple of choices for you with LBMC that we could help you with, either using some electronic filing that we're familiar with, and or we're also creating the opportunity for a report that will generate your 1099 information into the format that's necessary for you to upload directly. But you do have steps to get ready on the IRS website for doing that electronic filing. So be sure and get on that list if you want to see the details of that webinar. So in recent versions, Microsoft Dynamics GP has included support for the 1099 NEC type. That includes all kinds of things, including the tax type setup on the vendor maintenance windows and the non-employee tax setups in the 1099 details. It also includes the DBA, where you need to record a DBA within the 1099 information. So there's a variety of things within the most recent versions of GP that support that ability to generate 1099s directly from GP. So this is just a bit more about that specific 18.6 version that was available this month. This month. It feels like October still for October 2023, right? As it mentions here, LBMC has tested exporting the lined information from this 18.6, and we could help you all the way back to 18.3 to use tech support for being able to generate that information with that electronic filing requirement now. Okay. Any questions, Dawn?
Nope. And we shared the link for the tax filing webinar in the chat.
You're great. Thank you. So once we've done all those other steps, it's time for our year-end close. So we're going to go to the purchasing routines, purchasing in the routines area, and going to the year-end close. Similar to the receivables close, you can either close all fiscal or calendar, and the close year button is on the bottom, not on the ribbon. Once you've completed this once, those dates will populate into the last time you took action on this window. There is a year-end close report that generates. Make sure that you do it to a text file or to PDF and put it in your folders with all of your other support documents. And this slide talks about the things that get updated when you do that process. And this is also listed on page 54 in your workbook. There are some inquiries and smart list fields that are updated after the year is closed, and this is just a little bit of a snip to show you where those things are getting updated. Okay, we're moving on then to inventory. So our inventory checklist, review and post, check that batch recovery, print the stock status or the HITB reports and verify them to your general ledger. The only report that Microsoft suggests be the subledger for your inventory that reconciles to the general ledger is the historical inventory trial balance, not the stock status report. That's an important thing for those of you who are using inventory. If you're still using the stock status report, I'd like you to know that there are transaction types that happen in GP that don't actually show up on the stock status. So we would be very happy to help you get started with the historical inventory trial balance or begin using it again if it's gotten out of whack somehow. So let us help you get that on track so that you can use that subledger report effectively. Reconcile it to the GL and then close the fiscal periods.
Sandy, we have had a question come in.
Okay.
Does anything need to be done for the 1099s on 12/31?
So it has to do with when you post things into the subledger, not the date that you do it. So if you're transacting with vendors that you're still dating into the prior fiscal year, calendar year, then you can keep doing that in as far into 2024 as you need to, so that you get all the data for 2023. Once you've accumulated all the posted data for the 2023 year, then you can take action on 1099s based on that posted activity at any point in the new fiscal year that's appropriate for you. Okay, so it has to do with the posting date on transactions. So hopefully that answers your question. But if you have more questions about that, we'd be happy to talk about it further one-on-one.
Thank you.
Okay, inventory control year-end close. So we're on page 56 in your workbook. So reconciling that inventory to your historical inventory trial balance. So I want to show you on the inventory area page, when you have the HITB report created, and there is a set of steps that's necessary in order to begin using HITB, under activity, if you've done those steps, this very last selection will be the historical inventory trial balance. So use this as your subledger to the general ledger, reconcile it to your GL and make sure that all works. And then optionally, you may want to run the utility of reconcile. This needs to be done when users are not in GP, and reconcile all of your inventory. It writes any allocation issues and make sure that it's everything's in good shape when you do the year end. Many companies who use inventory do this on a periodic basis anyway. And please be sure that you include the checkbox to include item history. I will make note that there is an optional reconcile that's been added to the professional services tools library, but I want to warn you, if you want to use that one, there are some third-party products or ISV products that don't recognize that PSTL one. They only recognize this full one. So it's worthwhile to use this reconcile inventory quantities here, even if it takes a little while to do that. So that's our HITB report, which you're balancing to the GL and the reconcile function. And then in our routines area is the year-end close. So some additional functionality has been added in this window recently too. The remove discontinued items, remove sold lot attributes, remove sold receipts and cost change history, and to update our item's standard cost. So on page 59 in your workbook, leave all the boxes unchecked. Leave all the boxes unchecked, please. If you have some reason to think that you do want to use them, please contact LBMC and let's talk through what the impacts are. Otherwise, leave all those boxes unchecked. If you're on standard cost, there's a different set of routines that would be used to update item standard cost, not using this window to do those. Okay. When you do this process, there is no report that prints for inventory year-end closing. So don't be surprised, there's no report. Okay. It is doing things. All the summarized current year quantities, costs, and sales information for items all gets updated and transferred to history. The beginning quantity of each item is updated to be the on-hand quantity at each site, and the quantity sold field for each item is reset to 0. So if you're looking for sales history through quantities sold, then doing this process early in the new year is useful, but it's not a requirement. Okay, I think we completed that. I neglected to mention an annual physical count. If you want to do that, that can be accomplished in a couple of ways, including you can do a cycle count as comprised for an annual physical count. All can be completed in GP in the cycle count functionality. Be sure you get that backup, Dynamics and the company databases, and do that inventory year-end close. One more shout out there. These options are typically left unchecked on that window. Okay, this talks about what those steps are, those things that happen when inventory gets closed. Got a little ahead of myself there. Okay, our next module, fixed assets. So we're on page 62 in your workbook. So for the fixed asset module, all the activity for the current period, including asset additions, changes, transfers, and retirements, all need to get transacted. We're going to process the asset depreciation for the period that you're closing, right? So that would be period 12, the last period of your year. We're going to create the fixed asset GL transaction using GL posting window, post that generated GL batch, and then print the activities reports. Okay, so on pages 64 and 65, we're going to look at a little bit more of that fixed asset functionality and closing things. So we have a number of GP customers who use GP for many of the other modules, but not for fixed assets. And I would highly suggest that you consider adding this to your functionality within GP. It's a great tool to integrate with your payables and potentially purchase orders so that you can keep track of work in process and have it calculate accurately. You can have multiple different tax books. So if you have a book that's for your GL and then a different one that your accountant wants that's got different tax lives or calculation types, then you can have them all in one place, in one GP place, and use it there. So the first part is doing all of the activities. So the transactional activities for fixed assets include things like the retirements and undos and making sure that you've included all the new assets. Then you can use the depreciate function in the routines section to calculate the depreciation. You can depreciate it through a specific target date and for any or all of the different books. So in my environment, I've called my GL book internal, but I also have a federal and an AMT book, which I can use for keeping track of things that would then reconcile to what my CPAs might be keeping control of. Now, the fixed asset module has a separate set of posting steps. This GL posting window is the next step that it mentions. So it doesn't automatically post a transaction when you do things like depreciation or even additions. This GL posting step is necessary each time that you do transactions. So as a best case scenario, I like to go do this after each kind of transaction. So if I did ads, I'd come in here and do a process. If I depreciate all my assets, I'd come in here and do a process. That way I can see in that specific batch, individual types of activities taking place in my fixed asset subledger. Then once that's done, I'm going to go to my reports section and use the activity window to print out data that would then match my subledger. Right? So I've got a couple of different ones. That fixed asset to general ledger reconciliation is a good one. I also like one of the ones that's in inventory, where I can run a fixed asset list by class. And often that list by class is what is similar to my setup based on a GL account for vehicles, a GL account for buildings, things like that. So by class gives you a way to simply reconcile it to your GL. So once we've completed all of our period end transactions, then we're going to do some similar steps, right? That's our 12th period. We're going to go down to here on our 12th period. Then we're going to do our backups. And then we do the close year functionality. So there's an indication in the slides of the depreciation window, that posting window we looked at, the resulting journal entry, and then we get to our year-end close window. Okay. So navigation to this is in the financial routine section, year-end. And typically, if you've got tax books, you only do the tax books. You may only run the depreciation annually for those as opposed to monthly. Since it's not impacting your general ledger for those other books, you don't have to do them monthly if you don't choose to. But you should run the year-end process for those books. So you simply click internal or one of the other books. I would suggest that you do them individually, not all at once. Click the continue button and then it happens and then it processes. So again, a little inconsistency in the name of the button that you do the process with, but that process button is what gives you the functionality. This does print a year-end close report. Looks like this one. It is very important that you don't create any more new assets until you close the fiscal year. So you may have other payables that don't get entered until days after your end of your year. So you would certainly want to make sure that you close your fixed asset module before like the first part of February, because you need to be able to do your depreciation for the January year, and you need your year end to close in fixed assets before you go on. So you have a little bit of a buffer there, potentially 30 days. Okay, Dawn, do we have any questions?
Not right now.
Thank you. So we've made it to the general ledger. So our last period end general ledger close checklist is on page 68. Right? Post all your manual journal entries, recurring journal entries, review your GL batches, check that batch recovery window, make adjustments, final trial balance, financial statements, print them all to that set of file folders we created at the start of our webinar, and then close those fiscal periods. Then for the year-end checklist, right, we're going to verify all the account types. Super, super important. So there's an appendix again, appendix number 6, to verify your GL accounts. Then we're going to review the general ledger setup window. We'll print our trial balance, make backups. There it is again. Verify the new fiscal year setup, which we did that at the start of our webinar, and then close the general ledger. Okay. So we're going to verify our account types. So within each account setup are these posting type boxes. Now, by default, when you open the window, it defaults to the balance sheet. If you didn't properly set each individual account to P&L that was supposed to be, you run the risk of having the wrong impact when the year-end close happens, right? So for balance sheet things, it should include inventory, cash, payables, and receivables, and the activity for the year is summarized and moved forward as the beginning balance for each account, right? So balance forward moves forward, but the P&L accounts, all those sales and income, COGS, admin, all of those things, that all gets closed into retained earnings. So if you happen to have left something as a balance sheet that should have been a P&L, you're going to have a beginning balance instead of going to retained earnings. So we're going to review that general ledger setup window. Let's go do that. So on our financial area page, in the setup area, is the general ledger. So this section speaks about retained earnings, and you have the option to be able to use a single retained earnings account to close it to, or you can close to divisional account segments, which means that one of these segments represents a division that you want to close individually to that same main segment GL account. Then this section here speaks about what we want to maintain history for. Now, it again is not necessary for you to mark budget transactions if you're not doing budgeting in GP, but it doesn't hurt anything. If you're not doing those transactions, it just doesn't have any history for it, but it certainly can be a marked box. Then you're looking to see that they're all three marked. Okay. Into history. Want to show you in the financial smart list, in the accounts, where you have the ability to look at posting type here and reviewing this posting type, right? All of the balance sheet ones, if your main segment is available to sort on your main segment, you can just scroll down the list and verify all your posting types before you do your general ledger close, okay? Super useful. Then within the routines section is the year-end closing. This retained earnings account got picked up from that general ledger setup that we just looked at. The starting journal entry number defaults to the next one based on what your last one was. No reason to change it. It's fine. Just pick up the next journal entry. You might make a note of what that journal entry number is, because sometimes it's useful to go back to, but it will provide a printed document that you're going to put in your folders as well. Then you have two checkbox options to remove unused segment numbers and to maintain inactive accounts. So I don't suggest that you remove unused segment numbers. It's just typically not that many of them and not really worth worrying about. But I do tend to want people to maintain inactive accounts, right? Just because the account is inactive doesn't mean I want you to remove it, right? I want to maintain those inactive accounts. And then the close year is down here at the bottom. So I want to go back to the slide and point out that it's time for another backup. You aren't surprised, are you? It's time for another backup. Maintain that backup. Keep them in a separate place from where the IT puts their nightly backups. I want to go back to this window for just a second. Sorry, I guess I didn't have it as a slide, but we covered it in the demonstration portion. So, Dawn, if you wouldn't mind, could you launch poll question number 3?
Absolutely.
We'll give you a couple of minutes there for that poll question. Okay, I asked you kind of a hard question there, since that was what I was looking for, was to go back to the posting to history. So it was tricky. So we're going to talk about that posting to history settings while the poll is still up. So in the setup for your general ledger, the way that you would know that you're allowed to post something to a former closed period is that this allow posting to history box is marked. So what that means is if you get audit adjustments in February, March, August, whatever it is of next year, As long as that allow posting to history is marked, the only thing you have to do is go open the fiscal period for the last fiscal period of the closed year, and you can post a general journal entry into the most recent closed historical year. Now, you can't do subledger transactions, but you can do general ledger transactions into that most recent year based on that posting to history setting right here. Okay. Sorry about that. It's a little trick. Okay. When you do the GL closing, you get a warning message that says a single-use batch or quick journal transaction has not posted yet. So if you do sales order processing, it's very possible that it's okay that you have single-use batches, because sales orders get saved into batches. So it's possible that it's just fine that you have them. However, you should not have any batches that are open for payables or purchase orders, or not purchase savings, or inventory or GL, right? You should just have any single-use batches in the sales order processing if that's true for you. Okay. Be patient. Once you've clicked that button for that GL close, please be patient. It can take a while, right? Don't close GP, don't force close GP, don't task manager out. Don't do any of those things. Just wait. Just wait. It's very seldom that it actually crashes or doesn't finish, but it can take a while. So be sure that you're patient. Just let it take place as it needs to. Print and save that general ledger year-end close report. This is an example of what it looks like. And as I mentioned, that journal entry number is kind of a useful thing to have. It does print it on the report as well, but it's nice to have reference to that GL number because it's showing you how it closed things to retained earnings. Within that year-end closing window, there is a confirmation that it completed. It says process complete when it's done. So until you see that process complete, those words there, just be patient. So unlike AP and AR, GL does not need to be closed before posting to the new year, right? You can post general journal entries into the next year. And as I mentioned, it's very important to verify those account types. There's a couple of different fixes we could help you with if that doesn't happen. You do not need to reverse the years in some cases. So give us a call and let us help you if you find that there's accounts that got missed. And I think we're ready for poll question number 4, please. We're excited to hear from you about this poll question.
I think we have everyone. I'm going to give it a few more trickled in. Excellent. I'm going to close it down, Sandy.
Thank you, Dawn. So I had mentioned that there's a number of things in the appendix, and I just want to point out to you that, the appendix in the book, if you didn't get the workbook, all of those also exist here within the slide deck. Sending users a message, smart list for unposted transactions, smart list to verify those history settings. This is a cool one. So setting up an account roll-up. So you can create a group of GL accounts that give you a single column answer to things like if you've got multiple inventory accounts and you need to reconcile to the inventory, you can use the account roll-up inquiry to be able to do that with. So if you're curious, if you're interested, please do contact us. We'd be happy to show you what that account roll-up is and does. Makes things really easy when you're trying to reconcile to multiple accounts to a subledger. You can do that smart list to verify the 1099 vendor setup. It's a super helpful one. Verify those GL account setups. This one I actually showed you, and as an example in that screen snip, you can see where a cash account was created as a P&L account, which means that it would close to retained earnings. So that would be a problem. You wouldn't want that to happen. I also pointed this out a little earlier as well, the ability to reconcile to the general ledger. So again, the opportunity to use it for payables and receivables and use it as an Excel spreadsheet is good, not necessarily inventory and bank. And poll question number 5, please.
Okay, I think we have everyone. I'll just give it another few moments. All right.
Great, thanks. And we'll just take a couple of more minutes here and point out the Reconcile to GL report. If you want to use this, you have to make sure that you're on a device that has Excel loaded. You can't run it from a SQL server. Typically, they don't have Office on that. So notice it has to be a place where Excel is loaded. If by chance you still are struggling with your period end reconciliations of subledgers to GL, there is a tool that you can purchase called the Closer from Reporting Central, and it creates these Excel lists or lists within Closer, either one, that tell you the reason that you're out of balance, which is kind of nice. So if it's something that you're interested in, we'd be happy to help you with that. And I think that wraps up our day, Dawn.
Yes, I don't see any questions either in the chat or the Q&A, but I'm going to give it a few moments. Just a reminder that those of you wishing to receive CPE credit, that will come in one email, and you should allow 2 weeks to receive that. If you don't receive it, let me know, and I will track that down for you. Under a separate email, I personally will be sending out a link to the recording to this session, a copy of the slides, and a link to a survey. Let us know how we're doing. So with that, I'm double checking. Sandy, there's nothing in the chat and there's nothing in the Q&A, so I think we can call this a wrap.
Awesome. Thanks so much for attending, everyone. We are always here to help you. Please let us know if there's anything we can do to help with your year-end process. Have a great day.
Bye now.